Several of you might already know him. He's quite the star in the data plus sports analytics kind of area. His name is Kenji. He is the data science and sports analytics at Scouts Consulting Group. Today, he's going to talk to us about data in sports and uneven playing field. As the head of data science at Scouts Consulting Group, Ken spent his work days improving the performance of athletes and teams by analyzing the data collected on them. In his free time, he dabbles in entrepreneurship and content creation. He is best known for his YouTube channel, where he helps over 135,000 people navigate the data science landscape. He has started the hashtag 66 Days of Data Challenge to help people create the habit of learning and working on projects every day. In his free time, which he apparently has, Ken enjoys playing golf, fly fishing, yoga, and cooking. All right, I'm going to go ahead and bring the famous Kenji up on our DATAcated stage. Hello, Ken.
Thank you so much for having me. It's always a pleasure to speak at the DATAcated Conference, and I'm just so excited to share with you a little bit more about my sports analytics work, because last time I talked more about the content creation side.
Absolutely. Very, very glad to have you here. I'm going to hop off and share your presentation.
Excellent. Well, again, thank you for that wonderful introduction. Today, I'm going to share with you a little bit about my experience working in the sports industry. So something that I thought was pretty interesting when I was going in is I thought that in sports, all the teams were leveraging analytics very heavily. I thought that this was a domain that these teams are the best in the world. They must be doing things on the cutting edge. And that's what you hear about in the news and the media is this team is collecting this data, this team's doing this team's doing that. It is very much not the case that all the teams are leveraging sports analytics to its fullest. And I want to dive into that because I think this is going to lead to a lot of difference in performance over time. So one thing that I think would be fun is for everyone who is tuning in the comment section, let me know what your favorite sports team is. And after you put that in there, I'm going to give you some good news and some bad news. So the good news is if you like a select group of teams or organizations, you're likely going to see a lot of wins, a lot of championships, a lot of success going forward. And if you're a fan of, to be fair, the majority of organizations, you're probably not going to see quite as many wins, and you're definitely not going to see too many championships. And that's because of this uneven nature of sports analytics, efficiency and efficacy. And it's interesting because this sports analytics advantage that I'm describing, it compounds over time, it perpetuates. So if organizations are not doing it now, they're getting further and further behind. So I think something that is relevant here, I put this little picture together because I thought it was a good metaphor, is that sports analytics, they don't show immediate results. You start seeing results in most cases in 3, 5, maybe even at 10 years down the road. So teams aren't prepared to invest. Teams aren't prepared to invest right away, right? They're not prepared to invest because they don't see this quick return. This, as teams mature in their analytics organizations, they keep growing. They keep growing at a faster rate. That is like if Joel Embiid here was playing against this child, and each year Joel grew an extra foot, whereas this kid, as he grew up and reached full maturity, he only grew 6 inches every year. That's the kind of thing that we're looking at in this space. Now, obviously, I am a true believer in analytics. But are other teams, is this a real phenomenon? Is sports analytics real? That's honestly a question that a lot of people get. And this is the number of analytics staff that the MLB teams have had since 2019 to 2016. And as you can see, essentially every single team in the MLB has some form of analytics department. I will say that not all of those teams are using those analytics department or having decisions being made with that insight. As you can see, the Dodgers, the Yankees, and then the Rays, as of 2016, they peaked in the largest departments. And I will say those teams have had some pretty good success anecdotally. The Dodgers had a pretty good year last year, about as good a year as you could have. And I think that in this scenario, if everyone is doing it, there's probably something to it. I don't think my parents really liked that like that excuse when I was growing up, but it works now, and I think I can argue this one. Another angle to look at this is that there is some relationship between the total number of analysts and the winning percentage of these teams just in 2019. Again, this is a pretty small sample, and total analysts is probably not the best proxy for how effective an analytics team within an organization is. But in a second, I'll also talk about why we probably can't get a better proxy than total analysts for the strength of an analytics team at one of these teams. But again, as you can see, a lot of these organizations that are investing heavily in analytics are doing pretty well. And the Astros in 2019, I believe it was the year after they were cheating. So this is without their extra advantage here. Something that 538, the company that was the blog that published this graph, did last year or a couple of years ago, they made this analysis that compared hiring a analytics team to trying to essentially buy wins on the trade market. And so they looked at if a team would spend $350,000 on building out an analytics team, how many wins that would create. And they found that would, in theory, approximately create 2 new wins. Now, if you were to buy 2 wins on the trade market or through free agency, whatever that might be, that would cost about $9.1 million in player improvement. Now, I'm not saying that the analytics departments are more important than the players that you have on the field. That would be ludicrous. Talent and the players you have are always going to make your team, but you can get pretty good marginal returns from investing in the analytics staff. And those, again, as I mentioned before, can compound over time. So one thing I also do want to mention, I'm using baseball as an example here. Other leagues, the NFL, the NBA, the NHL, and I can't speak. I'm admittedly, I'm not as well versed in hockey as our next speaker, so I will definitely be watching that presentation intently. But the other leagues are actually quite far behind the MLB in terms of their analytic capabilities, and there's a lot more spread. You have some teams that are very advanced and some teams that are that have essentially no analytics department across these other leagues. So baseball as a proxy is going to be a closer race than some of these other leagues. Teams in the NBA, for example, that are leveraging analytics now are going to be able to create a light years, leaps and bounds advantage over other teams. So I keep saying, I've described what analytics are, how they're, hopefully you believe now that they're clearly real because everyone is using them. But why are these advantages perpetuated over time? What systems in this unbalanced system are making it so this advantage is going to stick around, so that people will not be, able to catch up as quickly as they would like to be. So I took a quick stab at my home football team, the Washington football team. They are sometimes, for some reason, anti-analytics, and I would expect, unless things change dramatically, they will be very far behind everyone else going forward. So I had to take that moment to do a quick call out because they broke my heart so many times over the last 10 years or so. Now, the first reason why this perpetual advantage is created, and also a lot of this unevenness is created, is that analytics is looked at very much like a trade secret. Teams are not willing to share anything. Teams are really focusing on rebuilding analytics from ground zero in their organization when they start these things up. Every team, for the most part, is reinventing the wheel when they are building out an analytics program. And if every team is reinventing the wheel, new teams still have to do that, and they have to go through that whole process because no one wants to share that information that is out there. I will also say that sports is not necessarily a generalizable problem. In very few circumstances it is. But what I mean by that is if I'm in an organization and we're working on lead scoring, if I go to another organization in a completely different industry, lead scoring, the model that I build there might be pretty similar. If I'm going from a sports, a non-sports organization to a sports organization, the problems that I'm seeing in sports are going to be fundamentally different than the ones that we're seeing in business for the most part, if you're working on the performance side. So that nature of the industry, but also the nature of the teams and protecting their competitive advantage lends itself to, again, some teams being really far ahead, maybe let's use baseball again, in pitching analytics, but that same team being a little bit behind in the hitting analytics. And then some teams being just really far ahead in all analytics, and some teams being very far behind. The next thing is that there's uneven access to data. So Hyun talked about how there is all this data, and he's right, there is unsophisticated data out there that's available to everyone. But the positional data that we're seeing from Second Spectrum, from StatCast, from ShotLink, and I can't remember what the one that they use, and I think it's Next Gen for the NFL, that is either pay to play, you have to have academic access, it is not available to everyone. So teams are buying this information, all the teams obviously have access to it, but teams can also collect additional data that gives them a compounding advantage over time. So for example, the Phoenix Suns, I believe the New York Knicks, I think the Golden State Warriors, and then maybe the 76ers all have shot tracking systems in their practice facilities. They are collecting that data now, and that data will pay off 3, 4, or 5 years down the road. But a lot of other teams are not investing in those technologies. They can also be collecting other information on the player, diet, sleep, workout routines. And a lot of teams are not collecting these things. And they're going to be kicking themselves down the road when they realize that, wow, this data, I really wish we had it, because as most of us as data scientists, we know that just working with this year's data isn't as good as working with this year and last year's, maybe the last 3 years, so we can start to see these trends. So this inequality in data and this unevenness in the data that's collected within the organization that is proprietary is another thing that is leading to this compounding advantage, because these teams are going to be relying very heavily on their internal data sources, because everyone else within the sports domain has access to the shot tracking, whatever it might be. The last area where this unevenness takes place is in the job market. So there really is not a consistent source of talent for sports. And that is because of this limited access to the real data that these teams are using. So it's really hard to upskill in sports analytics because you don't have access to the positional data that you're likely going to be asked to use on the job. So teams have a very difficult time hiring quality talent to build out these organizations. It's also really hard to find senior talent, because senior talent, when they want to leave, they're asked to sign a lot of NDAs, non-competes, all these types of things, because these teams do not want their competitive advantages getting out. So there's a lot of entry-level people that are qualified, but there are very few people who are out there available to lead them. And I will say, again, like, this market is really interesting. There are more recently ways where people can upskill in sports analytics specific work. There's an NBA hackathon on Kaggle. There's a football hackathon. And I believe there's like the Data Cup, which is for hockey, which the people that are winning these competitions, if they don't already have a job, they're getting scooped up at an alarming rate. So, just to rehash this, sports analytics is real. For the reason why there's this unevenness and this perpetual advantage created in sports is because of the privacy associated with teams, this competitive advantage, the secretive nature, the uneven access to different data sources that these teams are collecting internally, and also the lack of access to talent. So at the end, I'm hoping that everyone takes away a better understanding of this playing field, is that there are opportunities there. There still are arbitrage, especially outside of baseball, for analytics to really take hold. And this would be also a call to action for teams to really think about investing sooner rather than later. Because if you're not investing sooner, you're getting further and further behind. I will say, with our work, we have found that the teams that have already invested in analytics, the ones that are the most progressive, are the ones who are willing to pay for our services, the ones that are willing to think about analytics differently. And they do that at a higher clip than the ones that really need it, the ones that are so far behind. So this is the famous Crying Jordan meme. This is going to be all teams that did not adopt sooner rather than later. So that's all I got. I'd love to take a question or two if there are any. Thank you, Kate.
Absolutely, Ken. People are really excited to have you here. We question or
I'm
two.
excited to be
We
here.
have a lot of questions. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of time, but we will take one question because you had this chat blowing up with all of the team names that you asked about earlier in your talk. So we're going to flip this back on you. Kevin is asking, what are your favorite teams and what teams do you think are doing the best analytics?
So what are my favorite teams? So my number one favorite team, because it's our biggest client, is the US Ryder Cup team. So I think that that's a little bit of a different thing. That's a somewhat of a patriotic thing, but something that, you know, I got to have a little bit of hopefully a hand in the success there. So that would be my number one. I'm a DC sports fan through and through, although it has been very, very difficult over time. I like the Nationals a lot more because they can actually win. And they also have embraced analytics more than essentially the rest of the other DC sports teams. So that's kind of where I fall on that spectrum.
All right, awesome. Well, Ken, thank you so much for your time here today, and thank you for speaking again at the DATAcated conference.
Thank you so